10-Minute Murder contains depictions of actual crimes. What you are about to hear is real and violent in nature. Discretion is advised. This is 10-Minute Murder.
Welcome to the brief and bingeable true crime podcast, 10-Minute Murder. My name is Joe, and I'm the host, and I appreciate you being here today. Before we get started with the episode for today, let me remind you to subscribe to 10-Minute Murder if you have not done that already. When you do subscribe, you don't miss any episodes. As soon as I put it out, it comes to you, and you don't have to look for the podcast each time. So, like I mentioned the last couple of episodes, if you listen on Apple Podcasts, they change things up. You now click the plus button to follow the podcast, which is the same thing as subscribe. And I think on other ones, it's called collect. Subscribe, collect, follow, same thing. So click it and you won't miss any episodes. All right, the story today is a listener submission. And very frequently I get submissions, like daily, multiple every day. I get submissions of people saying, can you do an episode on this person? Can you do an episode on this person? And from there, I go and I research the cases and I see if there's enough to make a good episode, something that's interesting to listen to. And if it's one that's well known, an angle that maybe you haven't heard of before. But today's story is a listener submission that, number one, I have not ever heard of this case before. And number two, I didn't write it or research it. The entire story you're going to hear today was written and researched by Lindsay in Illinois, and it's written from her perspective, so keep that in mind as we go through the course of the story. This is the murder of Baby Crystal. The tragic case of Baby Crystal started when a teenage girl let the family dog out to do its business one evening. It was in the middle of winter, and winters in northern Illinois can be very unforgiving. When the dog came back to the house to be let inside, its mouth was carrying bloody clothing. The teenage daughter, most likely spooked by where the dog could have found the bloody clothing, told her parents about what just happened. The young girl and her parents began to search for the source of this clothing. It would be found 99 feet from their front door and 20 feet south of their driveway in a snowbank, discarded as though someone had simply thrown trash out of their car window as they drove past. It was a week before Christmas. Temperatures were sub-freezing. The high for that December day was 32 degrees, and the lowest recorded temperature for that December night was 15 degrees. And if you're a Midwesterner, you know that doesn't even include the wind chill, which could make elements feel much colder than what the actual temperature was recorded. Law enforcement would be called out to investigate what was the horrific discovery of the frozen remains of a newborn baby girl. The responding officers would dub the newborn baby Baby Crystal, because the night sky that night was crystal clear. Baby Crystal was a full-term newborn girl that weighed in at 7 pounds and some odd ounces, with dark, curly hair and blue eyes. She looked as though she were just sleeping, but officers knew otherwise. Someone had tossed the precious newborn baby girl out like she was garbage. The family that lived on the property consisted of a stepfather, a mother, a teenage daughter, and another daughter, Katie Stockton, an adult female who still lived at home with her parents and with her 4-year-old son. The family would be questioned, and they would deny having any knowledge of the origin of Baby Crystal. Katie Stockton was at the home of her boyfriend in Rockford, Illinois, on that cold winter night when detectives would show up to question her about Baby Crystal. Katie Stockton denied knowing anything. She even went as far as to pull up her shirt to reveal her stomach to the detectives and ask, "Do I look like I just gave birth to a baby?" She also refused to provide a DNA sample. This was the first time detectives questioned Katie about the murder of Baby Crystal, but not the last. The autopsy revealed that Baby Crystal, whom was dubbed Crystal Doe in legal documents, was born alive and breathing, but died by freezing and suffocating to death. The coroner said that Baby Crystal did suffer as she froze to death, and that it would have just taken a few hours on a sub-freezing night like December 17, 2004. Baby Crystal was also found to have hepatitis B and had cocaine in her system when she was born. However, there was no doubt that Baby Crystal would have lived if she had not been tossed along the side of the road. She was stuffed inside a plastic orange Menards shopping bag and also a white trash bag, with bloody clothes and the placenta still attached They were baffled because Illinois had safe haven laws. Newborn babies could be dropped off anonymously at a number of different safe places, and there would be no questions asked. The newborn would be provided medical attention and care, and eventually adopted out to a loving family, and the person abandoning the baby would not be sought out or questioned or made to face any repercussions for doing so. Baby Crystal would be almost 17 years old today if she had been given the chance to live. After the autopsy, the coroner arranged for donations for a proper burial. Rockton, Illinois, and the surrounding cities are small towns and a small community. Many people sent in donations of money, stuffed animals, blankets, and other items. 70 people attended the funeral, and baby Crystal was buried full of the donated items and a headstone that marks her burial site. Everyone from the small area was impacted by the discovery of baby Crystal's remains, from the officers on the scene that night to just the average Joe from the community, to the Winnebago County coroner that suffered the difficult task of performing her autopsy. Baby Crystal had not been forgotten to this day, and she most certainly was not forgotten during the 5 years after her discovery, when her case would go cold and then be broken wide open. Katie Stockton, the adult daughter that lived with the parents at the home where the murdered infant was found, had given birth to a healthy baby boy 4 years before baby Crystal was born and found murdered. Katie's pregnancy for her firstborn son was the first clue that she could be the top suspect for the mother/murderer of baby Crystal. You see, no one even knew Katie was pregnant with them until the 3rd trimester of the pregnancy, when she admitted to her mom that she might be pregnant. Katie Stockton didn't present as most normal pregnant women do in the last months of their pregnancy, with a large protruding belly that makes it pretty difficult to disguise. She didn't look pregnant. Katie had hidden her first pregnancy all the way up until she was about 8 months pregnant, and nobody ever suspected a thing. In 2009, detectives picked up the cold case, and it was discovered that despite being an adult female fully capable of getting pregnant and giving birth, and despite Katie Stockton living at home where baby Crystal was discovered 99 feet from the front door, a sample of her DNA had never been obtained. She had always denied involvement, but a DNA sample could conclusively eliminate her. She had refused to provide one up until that point. However, in 2008, Katie was charged with and pled guilty to writing bad checks. This guilty plea and conviction would require that she provide a sample of her DNA to law enforcement to be entered into the DNA database. All requests for a DNA sample went ignored by Katie, though, and she somehow managed to evade giving one willingly. In July of 2009, detectives working on baby Crystal's case were bound and determined to get Katie Stockton's DNA and had her under surveillance. Outside of her place of employment while on a smoke break, detectives finally got the break they were looking for. Katie Stockton discarded the cigarette she had been puffing away on, unaware she was being watched by detectives, and they were quick to collect the cigarette butt she discarded onto public property. They sent that off for DNA analysis. On July 31st, the first of the forensics reports would come back. The DNA on the cigarette butt was a match to the blood on the clothing that was found with baby Crystal. Further studies would show that her DNA was a maternal match to baby Crystal with a certainty of 99.9%. Meaning she was most likely baby Crystal's murderer as well. In August 2009, Katie Stockton was arrested by detectives in Kansas City, Kansas, on first-degree murder charges for the freezing suffocation death of baby Crystal. While questioning Katie in Kansas, she made comments about giving birth to baby Crystal and her disposal, but those comments would later be deemed inadmissible at trial because of Katie's claims to the Fifth Amendment and request for a lawyer prior to making them. She also made comments about a blue Saturn that she owned that the detectives were unaware of up until that point. This discovery would prove to be a major oversight by law enforcement. On August 11, 2009, detectives obtained and executed a search warrant on the Saturn, which they learned had been impounded at a private tow yard after Katie had been pulled over for traffic violations over a year prior. During the search of the Saturn, tragically, the badly decomposed remains of 2 more female full-term fetuses were discovered in the trunk of the car, buried underneath a damaged spare tire, a tire iron, and a craftsman's saw. The remains were inside separate plastic bags, with some containing clothing. Katie Stockton had been driving around with the decomposing remains of 2 infant daughters in her trunk for who knows how long. After autopsy, they were found to be baby Crystal's sisters and the daughters of Katie Stockton. They were 2 separate and full-term babies that were not twins. They were found to have different dads through DNA analysis, and none of the 3 girls had the same father as Katie Stockton's living son. Baby Crystal's father and one of the babies from the trunk's father were identified through DNA matching, but the father of the remaining female baby in the trunk has still not yet been identified. Law enforcement has said that the female baby whose father is still unidentified could have been conceived anytime between 2004 and 2009. Unfortunately, the babies found in the trunk were too badly decomposed to determine their cause of death, or even if they had been born alive. Autopsy could not even determine when they were born or how long they had been dead. As of this date, no charges have been filed in relation to their discovery. The discovery of 2 female fetal remains were deemed too explosive to be admitted into testimony during a criminal trial by the judge presiding over the case. In February 2013, 4 years after her arrest and denied bond, Katie took a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to first-degree murder for the freezing and suffocation of baby Crystal, and had 11 other murder charges dropped in doing so, in hopes the judge would go easy on her at sentencing. On April 15, 2013, the sentencing hearing against Katie took place. She was facing anywhere from 20 to 60 years imprisonment for first-degree murder. Her public defender asked for just 25 years, citing her drug abuse and addiction as the reason she murdered baby Crystal. Testimony of the remains found of the 2 female babies in the trunk of her Saturn was allowed at the sentencing hearing. The judge sentenced Katie Stockton to 50 years in prison without parole. She was in her early 30s when she was sentenced, so it's possible she will spend the rest of her life incarcerated. That is today's 10-Minute Murder, the brief and bingeable true crime podcast. And thanks again to Lindsay in Illinois for sending that story in. If you'd like to submit a story to 10-Minute Murder, you can do that by sending an email to 10minutemurder@gmail.com. It doesn't have to be an entire story written out like Lindsay's done, but just include as much information as you know about the case. 10minutemurder@gmail.com. Thank you for listening to 10-Minute Murder. Have a good night.